8 seconds ended the comparison. Those present did not hear an argument conclude, nor see a display meant to settle a score. What they witnessed was quieter than that. A pause, a brief exchange, and a decision made without being announced. The set resumed its work almost immediately. Yet long after, those who were there would remember the same detail. Nothing dramatic occurred, and no one felt the need to question the outcome. The set was already awake when the day began. Equipment had been positioned before sunrise. Lights were adjusted with familiarity rather than urgency. Crew members moved through their routines with the quiet efficiency that comes from working together long enough to anticipate one another's needs. This was not a day marked for significance. The space itself was unremarkable, an enclosed filming area shaped more by practicality than design. The floor bore the scuffs of repeated takes. Corners were cluttered with cases and folded cables. Nothing suggested that attention should linger longer than necessary. Bruce Lee arrived without announcement. He did not enter with the presence of someone expecting to be observed. There was no greeting that gathered focus, no pause meant to establish authority. He moved directly to the section of the set where rehearsal was underway, acknowledging those nearby with brief nods before settling into his work. Rehearsal proceeded without instruction. Bruce Lee walked the scene slowly, not to perform it, but to understand it. He adjusted his position by inches rather than steps. His attention remained fixed on distance, timing, and balance, elements that did not register clearly on camera but governed everything that followed. To an untrained eye, the movements appeared restrained, even minimal. There was no visible force applied, no exaggeration meant to impress. When he repeated a sequence, the motion became quieter rather than sharper, as if he were removing what did not belong. Most of the crew continued with their tasks. They adjusted the lights, they checked angles, they spoke in low voices about matters unrelated to what was unfolding nearby. Bruce Lee did not interrupt that rhythm. He fit within it. Yet a few noticed, not because he demanded attention, but because his movements resisted categorization. There was no wasted effort. Each adjustment appeared final, as though it had already been tested elsewhere. He did not rehearse toward an outcome. He rehearsed toward clarity. Between takes he stood still, not resting, not posing, simply present. His posture remained neutral. His breathing was steady. There was no visible preparation for anything beyond the next instruction from the director. This was the Bruce Lee that many encountered before understanding him. Not the figure framed by stories or reputation, but a working professional refining details that would never be named. There was no philosophy offered aloud, no attempt to teach. What guided his movements stayed internal. The set continued to function as intended. Nothing had been said, nothing had been challenged. But within the ordinary flow of work, an imbalance had quietly formed, unnoticed by most but impossible to reverse once felt. Jackie Chan had arrived earlier than required, moving through the set with a familiarity that came from growing up inside environments like this. Film sets were not intimidating to him. They were instructional, places where timing was learned through repetition and mistakes were absorbed without ceremony. He was younger than many around him, but not inexperienced. His confidence did not come from arrogance alone, but from effort. Years of training, injuries endured quietly, and a growing sense that his abilities were no longer theoretical. He understood rhythm, impact, and how movement translated through a camera lens. He had been watching Bruce Lee for some time. At first, it was casual, the kind of observation that happens while waiting between tasks. But as rehearsal continued, Jackie's attention returned more often than he intended. Something about Bruce Lee's approach felt disconnected from what he had learned to expect. There was no flourish, no visible declaration of skill. The movements were smaller than those Jackie had trained to deliver, yet they carried a completeness that was difficult to explain. When the comment was spoken, it was not sharpened for effect. It was said in a conversational tone, loud enough to be heard but not meant to provoke. A comparison, framed lightly, the kind of remark that young confidence allows, testing where one stands in relation to someone whose reputation already fills the room. "I'm better." The words did not carry hostility. They carried certainty. Conversation nearby faded without instruction, not because offense had been taken, but because the statement changed the shape of the space. Comparisons, once voiced publicly, do not remain private. Bruce Lee turned toward Jackie Chan. There was no visible reaction, no tightening of expression, no shift in stance meant to establish hierarchy. He listened as though the words required consideration, not correction. He did not respond immediately. Those seconds mattered. Jackie did not retreat from the statement, nor did he expand on it. He waited, not aggressively but expectantly. This was not a challenge shaped by confrontation but by curiosity, an attempt to locate himself within a larger landscape. Bruce Lee answered simply, not with explanation, and not with dismissal. His response carried no invitation to debate. It acknowledged the statement without accepting its premise. The exchange ended there. No agreement was reached, no tension was resolved. Yet the remark had altered the atmosphere. What had been internal observation was now external. What had been curiosity had been given form. The set did not stop working. But from that moment forward, attention had found a center, and it was no longer moving. The set absorbed the remark without reacting to it. No one laughed, no one corrected it. The work continued, but the pace shifted in a way that was difficult to measure. Conversations shortened, movements slowed slightly, as if the room itself were listening. Bruce Lee returned to his place without comment. He did not position himself opposite Jackie Chan, nor did he signal readiness. There was no stance assumed, no preparation that could be read as acceptance or refusal. He stood where he had been moments earlier, as though nothing had entered the space between them. Jackie remained where he was. He did not advance, and he did not withdraw. His posture carried ease rather than aggression. The confidence behind his words had not faded, but it had been placed on hold, waiting for definition. Around them, the crew resumed routine tasks with deliberate neutrality. They adjusted equipment. They checked continuity. Yet attention hovered, unassigned, aware that something unresolved now occupied the room. No one announced a challenge. There was no call for a demonstration, no suggestion made aloud. The tension that formed was not built through confrontation but through restraint. The absence of escalation made the moment heavier, not lighter. Bruce Lee's stillness became noticeable, not because it contrasted with movement, but because it refused to resolve the uncertainty Jackie's words had created. He neither affirmed nor dismissed the comparison. He allowed it to remain suspended. This unsettled more than an argument would have. Jackie shifted his weight slightly, then steadied. It was a small adjustment, unnoticed by most, but those watching registered it as a question rather than a decision. Time passed without anyone marking it. There was no countdown, no cue that something was about to happen. The sense of inevitability did not come from anticipation of action, but from the recognition that the comparison, once spoken, could not be left unexamined. Bruce Lee looked up, not sharply, not with intent to challenge, just enough to acknowledge the shared awareness in the room. Nothing was said. But in that quiet interval, the outcome began to settle, not through force, but through alignment. What followed did not present itself as a beginning. There was no verbal agreement, no instruction offered to frame what was about to occur. The transition was so subtle that several witnesses would later disagree on when it actually started. Bruce Lee stepped forward, not to confront, but to clarify. The movement was slight, measured in inches rather than steps. There was no sudden change in posture, no visible gathering of force. His body remained relaxed, aligned, as it had been throughout rehearsal. Jackie Chan responded instinctively. Not with resistance and not with retreat. His attention sharpened, his stance adjusted just enough to engage. The exchange that followed was brief, contained, and difficult to isolate into individual actions. Those watching would later describe it differently. Some said Bruce Lee's hands moved first. Others insisted it was Jackie's balance that shifted unexpectedly. A few could not recall seeing movement at all, only a moment where certainty dissolved. What was consistent across every account was the duration. It ended almost as soon as it began. There was contact, but it was neither forceful nor dramatic. No strike landed in a way that could be pointed to afterward. Instead, the interaction resolved itself through positioning, distance managed, balance redirected, intent quietly neutralized. Jackie Chan stopped, not because he was told to, not because he had been overwhelmed. His body simply arrived at a conclusion before his thoughts could challenge it. Bruce Lee disengaged immediately. There was no follow-through, no emphasis meant to underline the result. He stepped back to where he had been, posture unchanged, expression neutral. The exchange had not altered him in any visible way. The silence that followed was complete. No sound filled it, not surprise, not reaction. The absence of spectacle left no cue for response. Applause would have felt inappropriate. Comment is unnecessary. Jackie stood still, eyes lowered briefly, attention turned inward. He adjusted his footing once, subtly, as if confirming something to himself. When he looked up again, his expression had changed, not with embarrassment, but with recognition. 8 seconds had passed. Nothing dramatic had occurred. Nothing needed explanation. And yet the comparison that had entered the room no longer required defense. The set did not react to what had just occurred. No one spoke. No one stepped forward to acknowledge it. Work resumed with the same practical attention it had carried before, but something had shifted beneath the surface. Jackie Chan moved first. He stepped back, not abruptly and not as a retreat. The motion was careful, almost deliberate, as though he were giving space to something newly understood. His shoulders relaxed, and with that release, the certainty that had accompanied his earlier remark no longer occupied the room. He did not look around for confirmation. There was no attempt to preserve an image or recover footing in front of others. What had changed was internal, and it did not require witnesses to validate it. Bruce Lee did not remain where the exchange had ended. He returned to rehearsal without pause, adjusting his position on the floor, as if the interruption had been logistical rather than significant. There was no glance back, no acknowledgement meant to seal the moment. His attention returned fully to the work at hand. This mattered. Had Bruce Lee lingered, the moment might have hardened into instruction. Had he offered reassurance, it might have softened into courtesy. By doing neither, he allowed the exchange to remain intact, finished without explanation. Jackie remained quiet for the rest of the session. He watched more than he spoke. When directions were given, he followed them carefully, without embellishment. His movements were still confident, but the confidence had shifted from assertion to observation. Those nearby noticed the change without naming it. Crew members did not discuss what they had seen. There was an unspoken understanding that commentary would diminish the clarity of what had occurred. The absence of reaction preserved the lesson more effectively than any remark could have. As the day continued, Bruce Lee's presence felt unchanged. He did not carry the authority of someone who had just proven something. If anything, his manner became even more understated, as though the demonstration had required no effort worth remembering. Jackie Chan did not approach him afterward. There was no apology offered, and none expected. The space between them was not filled with explanation or reconciliation. It remained quiet, and in that quiet, the meaning of the moment settled naturally. The comparison that had entered the room earlier did not return. It had not been dismissed. It had simply resolved. And in the stillness that followed, everyone present understood that nothing more would be said. Not because it could not be, but because it no longer needed to be. The hours that followed carried no visible marker of change. The schedule moved forward. Scenes were reset. Instructions were given and followed. To anyone arriving later, the set would have appeared unchanged, its rhythm intact. Yet among those who had witnessed the exchange, attention had turned inward. Jackie Chan kept to himself. Not withdrawn and not unsettled, but quieter than before. He moved with deliberation, as though testing each decision before committing to it. When he practiced between takes, his repetitions grew smaller, more contained. He no longer pushed movement outward for effect. He watched Bruce Lee closely, not with comparison and not with resistance. His focus was different now, less about matching skill, more about understanding what had escaped him earlier. He studied spacing. He noted how Bruce Lee waited rather than rushed, how motion emerged only when it served a purpose. No instruction was offered. Bruce Lee did not correct Jackie's form, nor did he offer insight into what had occurred. He treated him as he treated everyone else on set, with professional courtesy and minimal interference. The absence of commentary allowed the experience to remain Jackie's alone. This too was noticed. In the quiet stretches between setups, Jackie adjusted his own practice. He reduced unnecessary movement. He tested balance instead of speed. When something felt unstable, he did not force it into shape. He stepped back and tried again. No one pointed this out. The lesson unfolded without structure, absorbed through repetition rather than explanation. It did not arrive as a revelation, but as a gradual reorientation. Confidence did not disappear, it recalibrated. Bruce Lee's behavior remained consistent throughout. He did not appear aware that anything had shifted. He did not reference the earlier exchange, nor did he treat Jackie differently afterward. His restraint extended beyond physical demonstration into how he allowed others to learn. By the end of the day, the difference was subtle but lasting. Jackie Chan had not been corrected publicly. He had not been instructed privately, yet something fundamental had been introduced. An awareness that mastery could exist without display, and that certainty did not need to be declared aloud. The set closed without acknowledgement of what had occurred, but the learning continued, quietly, carried forward, not through words, but through attention. Time did what it always does. It widened the distance between the moment and its explanation. The set was dismantled, the production moved on. People scattered to other projects, other cities, other responsibilities that demanded immediate attention. What had happened that day was not preserved in any official record. It remained with individuals. Years later, when those who had been present encountered one another again, the memory surfaced without effort, not as a story meant to impress, but as a reference quietly shared. Someone would mention the day in passing and another would recognize it immediately, without needing details filled in. The accounts were never identical. Some remembered the stillness more than the exchange itself. Others recalled how quickly the set returned to work. A few admitted they could not describe what Bruce Lee had done, only how certain it had felt when it ended. Jackie Chan rarely spoke about the incident directly. When he did, it was not framed as a turning point in the dramatic sense. He did not describe it as defeat, nor as instruction delivered by another. Instead, he spoke about how his understanding of control changed over time, how he began to value timing over force, clarity over display. The shift was gradual. In his later work, those close to him noticed an economy that had not always been there. Movements became more precise. Physical comedy, though still expressive, carried a tighter structure. Risks were calculated with greater awareness of balance and consequence. No one traced this evolution to a single moment, but for those who had witnessed the exchange years earlier, the connection was difficult to ignore. The lesson had not been delivered as guidance. It had been absorbed through experience, revisited quietly over time. Bruce Lee did not remain present to claim influence. He never referenced the incident publicly. He did not correct interpretations as they circulated privately among professionals. By leaving the moment untouched, he allowed it to mature in the minds of others. This restraint shaped how the story survived. It was not repeated as an example of dominance, but as an illustration of alignment, when certainty meets clarity and comparison dissolves without argument. The longer the years stretched, the less the details mattered. What endured was the understanding that mastery could settle a question without raising its voice, and that some lessons, once encountered, continue teaching long after the moment itself has passed. The incident did not become a story Bruce Lee carried with him. He did not repeat it, refine it, or offer it as evidence of anything achieved. In the years that followed, his work continued in the same manner it always had, quietly disciplined, shaped by reduction rather than display. Those who knew him well understood this absence as intentional. Bruce Lee rarely claimed moments that could have elevated his standing through comparison. He allowed experiences to remain where they occurred, unmarked and unclaimed. In doing so, he denied them the permanence of ownership and gave them instead the longevity of influence. The exchange with Jackie Chan followed this pattern. It was not cited in interviews, it did not appear in official histories, it survived only through those who had been present and through the changes they carried forward. As years passed, the story lost sharp edges, names were sometimes omitted, settings blurred. What remained was not a sequence of actions, but a feeling of resolution that resisted embellishment. People spoke of it when discussing mastery, not to define Bruce Lee and not to diminish Jackie Chan, but to illustrate a standard that existed without performance. The lesson was never framed as superiority. It was framed as restraint taken seriously. Jackie Chan's later career unfolded in full public view. His success was undeniable, built on innovation, endurance, and an understanding of physical storytelling that few could match. Yet those closest to his process noticed something beneath the spectacle, a carefulness, a respect for limits, a willingness to let motion serve purpose rather than ego. He never credited that to a single moment, but neither did he dismiss the quiet recalibration that had begun years earlier. Some lessons do not demand acknowledgement to remain active. Bruce Lee's legacy followed a similar path. He became associated not only with skill, but with a certain absence of excess, of unnecessary force, of explanation. Stories about him often ended the same way, without spectacle, without resolution that could be reenacted. The exchange on that set fit naturally into this pattern. Nothing had been won publicly, nothing had been conceded aloud. Yet long after both men moved beyond that moment, the understanding it produced continued to shape how mastery was recognized, less through assertion, more through inevitability. The moment did not ask to be remembered, and because of that, it was.